Guys, Becky here from Genie Frog Crochet, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make my new blanket pattern. So it's called the Shenani-ghan Afghan. I've done several colorways in the written pattern. In this tutorial I'm going to show you Calm the Shenanigans, which I have done in Yarnsmith's Pebble Haze Prints, and this one is shade 2M100, and I'm also going to be using Pebble Haze Aran in Limestone for this one. For the other colorways you can follow the link to go and get the written pattern. So to start off, I mean, you can see I've already made some of it ready to do this tutorial. So the blanket's made up of 5 panels. So for each panel, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to need 2 size hooks. So I've got a 5mm and a 5.5mm for this Aran weight yarn. You're also going to need your scissors and a darning needle for your ends. So let's make a start. So for each panel, the first thing you're going to want to do is to make 9 granny squares from your Pebble Haze prints. So let's just zoom in a little bit. So to make our granny square, we're going to pop a slip knot on the hook. And then I'm going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to join to my first chain with a slip stitch, like so, to make my center hole where I'm going to place my stitches. So first of all, you're going to chain 3, which counts as your first double crochet, and then into the center of your circle we're going to place another 2 double crochets. So to double crochet, we yarn over, insert the hook, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. So we're going to do another double crochet in there, yarn over through 2, yarn over through 2. Then we're going to chain 2 to make our first corner, and then we're going to do a granny cluster into the same central space. So that's 3 double crochets for a granny cluster. So 1 double crochet, 2, and 3. That's your granny cluster. So make another corner by chaining 2, and then we're going to do another granny cluster of 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, and then chain 2 for the corner. As you can see, we need 1 more granny cluster to make our square. So 3 double crochets in there. And then what you're going to do is you're going to chain 2 for your last corner, and then join to the top of your first chain 3 with a slip stitch. So pull through and then pull through the hoop on your hook. I'm going to tighten that center up. So for the second round we're going to turn our work over to the other side and then chain 3 which counts as your first double. So then in this corner space, I'm going to put another 2 doubles. Chain 2, and then a granny cluster in that corner space. And that then makes our new corner. So we're going to go over to the next and do granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, and the same over in the next corner. Chain 2, granny cluster, and then we're going to do the same then in the last. Three doubles to make your granny cluster, chain 2 for your corner, and then 3 doubles. So then we're just going to join to the top of the chain 3 again with a slip stitch. So go into that stitch, pull your yarn through like so. So then we're going to turn our work again for the final row. Chain 3 again for your first double, and then make another 2 doubles in between these granny clusters from the last round. And then make your corner in the same way, granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, then in that central space between your granny clusters from your last round, make a cluster in there, and then cluster, chain 2, cluster for your corner. So you're going to repeat that all the way around. So just carry on, pop a cluster in between, cluster, chain 2, cluster in your corner, and I'll meet you up when we get round to this point. Last double crochet, and then to finish off your square you just join to the top of that chain 3 with a slip stitch, cut off your yarn and fasten off. So to make our first panel, the first thing you've got to do is do 9 granny squares, and then I will meet you back up and show you what we do next. So here I've got my 9 granny squares, weaved in all of the ends, and I'm going to place my pile with the wrong side facing me. So your last row will be facing down, and the next thing we need to do is get our limestone yarn. Oh, and again, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll see that I always do this to myself. I always leave, getting my yarn ready until I'm actually recording. Let's put our bigger hook out of the way here and find the end. So I will be putting all of the yarn amounts down in the description box. that you'll need for this colourway. This Pebble Haze Prints yarn, oh, I'm in love with it. It's come out so well because you never know, each granny square seems to be a little bit different. Okie dokie, so you get your pile of granny squares. I'm going to pop a slip knot on the hook. Still with your 5mm hook, and you're going to take your first granny square with the wrong side facing you, and we're going to make a standing double crochet in our first corner space here. So yarn over and insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. I do have a separate video for standing stitches if you're not quite sure how to do that, or you could just join your yarn and chain 3. It's entirely up to you, whichever way you find easiest. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a granny cluster in the next 2 spaces between our clusters from the last row. Like so, and when you get to your corner, we're going to make a corner like we did for our squares, but in between each cluster. So you're going to do a granny cluster, and instead of a chain 2, we're actually going to do a chain 3. 1, 2, 3, and put another cluster in that corner space. Like that, and then again in the next 2 spaces do a granny cluster, like that. And now in this corner space we're going to make a 3 double crochet cluster. So the way we do that is we basically do 3 incomplete double crochets. So let me show you. So you yarn over, insert your hook and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. Now usually for a double crochet you'd yarn over and pull through 2, but what we're going to do is we're going to do that again another 2 times. So you're going to yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. So now we've got 3 loops on the hook. So we're going to do it one more time. Yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2. So now you've got 4 loops on your hook. So all you're going to do then is yarn over and pull through all 4 loops on your hook. And that's a 3 double crochet cluster. So what we're going to do then, we're going to get our next granny square and we're going to make a 3 double crochet cluster into the corner space to join them together. So yarn over, go into the corner space, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through just 2. And again, yarn over, into the corner space, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through just 2. And the last time, yarn over, into your corner space, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and then you're going to yarn over and pull through all of the loops on your hook. So that then joins your granny squares together. So you're going to carry on and do the same thing we did for the last one. So we're going to make a cluster in each of the next 2 spaces between the clusters. And then in the corner again, we're going to do cluster chain 3. We're going to do that for all of the peaks of our chevrons. 1, 2, 3, chain 3, cluster, and back down the other side, do a cluster in each of the next 2 spaces. And we're going to join our next square in exactly the same way as we did this one. So in this corner space, we're going to do a 3 double crochet cluster. So yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 2, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 2, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through just 2. So you should have 4 loops on your hook, and then you yarn over and pull through all 4. Then you take your next square, make sure it's the wrong side facing you, and you're going to do a 3 double crochet cluster in that corner space to join them together. Pull through all 4, and then you carry on to your granny clusters at the sides. Do your granny cluster chain 3, granny cluster in the corner, and then you're going to go down, granny cluster, and join your next square in the exact same way. And you're going to do that all the way along until you get to your last square, and I will meet you back up there and show you what we do going into the next round. Okay, so I'm just on my last square, going down the side with 2 granny clusters in the last 2 spaces. Oops, I'm flipping my yarn about all over the place. And then in your last corner, so you can see this is my last square, so your last corner, you're just going to place 1 double crochet just on its own, which will create our straight edge coming up the side of our blanket. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn our work, so you're going to have to sort of slide all of your train of granny squares, choo choo. Make sure they're all facing the right way. So for our second row of the chevron, we're going to start by chaining 3, which counts as a single double crochet on its own, and then we're going to go straight into this first gap and do a granny cluster, and another one in the next space, and then it's pretty much the same as the last row where you do cluster, chain 3, cluster in your peaks. Of your chevrons, and then when you get down to sort of the valleys, So we do clusters going into the next 2 spaces between clusters from the last row. And then if I lay it down, you can see we're going to be keeping our valleys tight together by doing 3 double crochet clusters. So we're going to do 1 in between the granny cluster and the 3 double crochet cluster from the last row. So again, pull up a loop, pull up through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2, and then pull through all the loops on your hook, and then you're going to jump over those 2 clusters and do 1 in between the 3 double crochet cluster and the granny cluster. And you'll see that's how we're going to make our valleys. So you go back up the other side then, in exactly the same way, granny clusters in the next 2. Our peak of granny cluster, chain 3, granny cluster, 1, 2, 3. And we're going to do this same all the way along for each square. So every peak you do your 2 granny clusters, chain 3, and in every valley you do your 3 double crochet clusters at either side of your clusters from the last round. So do that all the way along, and I'll meet you back up at the end. So I'm just on my last square. Chain 3, the same as we did for the end of the last round. You're going to do 2 clusters going down the side, like that. And then when we get to our last stitch, this last double crochet, we're just going to pop 1 single double crochet into the top of that stitch, like that. And then for this colourway, I'm going to carry on with the limestone for all of my chevrons. So we're going to turn our work over again, and I'm going to do another 4 rows of this limestone. So in exactly the same way, we chain 3 to begin our row, and that counts as our double crochet at the beginning, and you repeat the last row then all the way until you get to your last square, and this time your last double crochet will go in the space between your chain and your cluster, and then you turn your work again and repeat again until you've got 6 rows of the limestone, and then I will meet back up with you and show you how we do the other side. Okay, so I'm just coming up to the end of row 6. Final row of this side. One last cluster. And then the last stitch into the space there. So after that row, we're gonna cut our yarn. Ooh, time for new scissors. And fasten off. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn our work as we normally would, but then we're going to spin it around. So now to complete our panel, we're essentially going to do exactly the same chevron pattern as we did this side over this side. So it's easier this side, obviously, because our squares are already joined together. So we're going to join into the corner space of that square with a standing double crochet. Like so, and then we're going to continue in the same way as we did for the other side. So we're going to put a cluster in each space. Oops. And then in our peaks, we're going to do our granny cluster, chain 3, granny cluster, and we're going to go down the other side of the square, cluster in the next 2 spaces, oops, and then we're going to join our squares in the same way with our 3 double crochet cluster stitch in the corners. And as I said, it's a little bit easier now because they're already joined. So you put your cluster into that corner space of the granny square where your other cluster is. So pull through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2, and make your cluster stitch, and then you're going to make your other cluster stitch in the corner of the next granny square. And just carry on the same way with your chevron pattern. Clusters in each space. And then your 3 double crochet cluster stitches in your corners of your granny squares. And again, for this side, we're going to do 6 rows. And that will be your panel complete. So you want to make 5 of these panels. So 9 granny squares, and then your chevron stitches either side. And when you've done all 5 of your panels, I'll meet back up with you to show you how we join them together. See you then. Okay, so the next step, and please don't hate me, is to make 32 granny squares out of your Pebble Haze Prints yarn. And then what we're going to do is we're going to separate them into 4 lots of 8. Let's put 3 of those to one side. Turn them so that your wrong sides are facing, and then get one of your panels that you've finished, and you want to lay this also with the wrong side facing you. So your last row will be facing down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to place a granny square into each of our valleys, and we're going to join along the back with a slip stitch join. So to do this, you want to put your smaller hook to one side and take your larger hook. So for this colourway, it's your 5.5mm hook, and get your limestone yarn. Pop a slip knot on your hook, and we're going to join the square. We're going to go through the first peak and through the corner, go through the whole thing and join it with a slip stitch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to join with a slip stitch, but we're just going to go through the back loops only. So the first stitch here, you go through your back loop, and then on your granny square you go through the back loop of the first stitch, pull your yarn through and make a slip stitch, and do that in every double crochet along. Make sure you're not making your slip stitches too tight. This is why we go up half a hook size, just to make sure it's not puckering up. Back loop, and we do this all the way down to the corner. Back loop of your last stitch, and then we're going to go into the back loop of our first 3 double crochet cluster, and then go into the back loop of one of your chains, your first chain of your granny square, and do the same then for the next cluster and the next chain. And then we're going to do the same slip stitch through every stitch in the back loop up the other side. And when you get to a join in your square, like I have here, just make sure you pop through in the right stitch. So this one here I can see is my middle double crochet of my cluster, so I want to make sure I'm joining to the middle cluster on the other side. Sometimes I find it handy to just take my thumbnail so that I can make sure I'm popping through the right loop. Go through your last double crochet, and then for the last stitch you're just going to go through one of your chain stitches. I tend to go through the second one, so skip the first chain stitch, go through the second, because remember you've got 3 chains, and go through the first chain stitch in the corner of your granny square, like that. So there you've joined your first square. It's got this nice ridge pattern on the back, and then the front of your blanket will have a nice little seam. So then all you're going to do is take your next square excuse me, go through your first the second chain, the chain right before that first stitch, and go through your second corner chain. Again, make sure your granny square has got the wrong side facing you. And then you're going to join that in exactly the same way. So the back loops only, all the way down to your valley. Like that. So do that for all of your squares, into all of your little valleys, your 8 squares, and when we get to the last one here, I'll join back up with you to show you how we fasten off. Okay, so I'm just coming up, I'm going to join my last square. So through the first chain with that one, and then through the next chain, grab my last square, that through. So with your last one, you're just going to do the same as you have. All the time, making sure you don't accidentally skip any stitches or go into the wrong loop. Now we do clusters into the corner chains. That's the first one. And the second one. And now up this last side. Again, I've got a join there, so I can just show you that again. Because you've got 3 double crochets on each cluster, it's quite handy to make sure you're going into the third and into the third and into the first and into the first to keep track of where you are. So my first double crochet here is where my join is. So I make sure I go into this loop here. And then for my second double crochet of the cluster, back loop, and make sure I don't accidentally skip that second after my join. Just go through the back loop of that one. So go through your last back loop of your last double crochets of your clusters, and now instead of, because we're not going to be joining another square, instead of going into the chain, you actually go into the chain space of this one and into the corner space of your square and join with a last slip stitch through those, and then you can cut off your yarn And we're going to be doing this for four of your panels. So you've got your 4 stacks of 8 granny squares. So here I've done 1. I'm going to do it for another 3 panels, and then I will join back up with you to show you how we join them all together and how we do the border. Okie doke, see you in a bit. Okay, so once you've joined your squares to 4 of your panels, we're going to join the panels together, working from the bottom up. So if you take your 5th panel, the one that you haven't put any squares onto, and place it at the bottom, then get one of your panels that you've put your squares onto. Again, make sure you've got the wrong side of your work facing you, and then what you're going to do, working your way up with the wrong side facing. Let's move everything out of the way. You're going to join the next panel up in the exact same way that we have been. So with your larger hook, put a slip knot on your hook, and we're going to be doing the slip stitch join through the back loops again. So we're going to go through this first peak and through the corner of your granny square that's attached to your next panel, and join with a slip stitch like that. And then in the exact same way, we'll go through the back loop of your first stitch. Oops. And that one there. Let's move this over a bit. And then through the back loop of the first stitch of your granny square. And make a slip stitch. And again, we're going to do that all the way down into the valley. The last one, and then the same as you did before in your cluster stitches, going to go through the back loop of that, and then through the back loop of your first chain in the corner of your granny square, and the back loop of your next cluster, and then the back loop of the second chain in the corner of your granny square. And then we're going to go back up the other side. Until we get to our next peak. It does take a little bit of moving your work around. So go into the last stitch of your square and of your panel, and then when you get to this part where your squares join to your other panel. You're going to go through the second chain, the back of the second chain, and then the chain that you missed, joining your square to your last panel, that chain there, you're going to slip stitch into that one. And then on this side, go through your next chain space in the back loop. And then on this square here, can you see this chain where my thumbnail is? We're going to be going through that one there. And carry on. And that is how your join will look. Okay, so carry on along into the end of this one, and when you get to the end, the same as we did when we were joining our squares, just go through the actual space. Hang on, let me show you at the end. Slide it all along, slide it all along. So when you get to the last square, you're going to go up and down, and then when you get to the last one, you're going to go through the actual chain 3 space here and join through the actual chain 2 space there. And then what I like to do is knot these two ends together then. Let me show you at the beginning. So before I weave in these ends, these two here, I will just knot them together just for a little bit of extra security, because you don't want to put all this work into making a big blanket and risk things coming undone. So then I'll weave those in. So do that for every single panel. Just keep moving your work down. Grab your next panel with your squares and join that, and again move down, join the next one and the next one. And when they're all joined, I will meet you back up and show you how to do the border. Okay. Okay, so once you've joined all of your panels together, we're going to finish the blanket off with a lovely simple border. And I'm going to do my border with the limestone, but it would also look quite nice, I think, with a border of the prints. Okay, so to do your border, you're going to want to switch back to your smaller hook. So that's the 5mm hook for this colourway. So with the wrong side of your blanket facing you, you're just going to want to join. Oh, my blanket's falling off the desk, yeah. Quite big and heavy now, which is going to be lovely when it's draped all over you. Right. So we're going to join in this corner space here. So going up the side of your blanket, in between your single double crochet on its own and your cluster, we're going to join with a standing double crochet. And I'm just going to do it on the side. And then do another 2 double crochets. So this border is basically going to be just an extension of the body of your blanket. So it's going to be made up of clusters, granny clusters, and 3 double crochet together clusters. So to make our corner, we're going to chain 2. And then in that same space, we'll do another granny cluster. And then to go along the top of your blanket, you're just going to do exactly the same as we were doing for the rows of our chevrons. So a cluster in every space. Like that, and in our peaks, granny cluster, chain 3, granny cluster, and the same going down the other side. And then when you get down to your valley, 3 double crochet cluster in there, and a cluster over the other side. Like that. So just carry that all the way along to the other side of your blanket, and I'll meet you up at the next corner. So I'm just coming down the last side before I get to my corner. And then a cluster in the last space between clusters, like that. And when you get to your last space here, this is where you're going to put your corner. So in that space, put a granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster in there, and then spin your blanket around so that we're now working down the sides of our panels. And it's really simple. You're just going to pop a granny cluster into each one of these spaces. And when you get to your granny square, you're going to put a cluster in the corner of that granny square. Give you a nice straight edge to your blanket. And I've left some of my ends so that I can crochet over them before I weave them in. But that's up to you. If you've already weaved them in, that's fine. I used to be scared of leaving all my ends until the end of a project, but I don't actually mind it too much now. Okay, so in each space all the way along until we reach one of our notches. Sorry, I'm trying to hold this on the desk without dropping it all. So when you get to where your panel has a notch between panels, we're basically just going to treat it as a corner. So we put a cluster, chain 2 and another cluster in that space. And then these little valleys we treat the same way that we did with the valleys on our chevrons. So do 2 clusters leading down. And then in this corner space, you're going to put a 3 double crochet cluster. And then you're going to leap straight over to the next corner space on the other side of your square and put a 3 double crochet cluster in there to get over to the other side. And then carry on with your granny clusters up the other side. Like that, and when you get up to the other edge, you put another corner like we did this side over here. So granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster in the same space. So that is basically how we're going to do our border. So do that until you get down to the next corner, and then across the bottom of your blanket you do the same chevron row, and then this up the other side as well, a granny cluster in each space. Make a corner, make a valley, make a corner, and I will meet up with you at the end of round 1 of the border. Okay, so I'm just coming up to the last couple of clusters at the end of round 1. And then you want to join to the top of your standing stitch with a slip stitch, like so. And then you're going to turn your work, so turn your whole blanket over, which is easier said than done at this point. So then you'll be working on the right side of your blanket for your final round. I'm just going to pull that tail through to the other side. There we go. So for your last round of your border, you're going to chain 3, which counts as your double crochet, and do another 2 doubles in that space. And then this round is super simple. You just do a cluster in between each cluster. So going along the side, they're not as easy to see, so just make sure you're going in between each of your 3 double crochet clusters. And then every time you come to a corner, you're going to make a corner. And every time you come to a little valley, you're going to do the same as the last round. You're going to make your 2 3 double crochet clusters to make your valley. So I'll do this first little bit with you. So going between each cluster, going along the sides. When you get to your little corner space, going down the sides, you're going to make your cluster chain 2 cluster in that little corner. And then when you get down into your valley, you're going to make your 3 double crochet cluster stitches in there, and again with the top and the bottom you're going to do your cluster chain 3 cluster at your peaks, and that is the last round of your border. So you can fasten off, then join to the top of your chain 3, and then you can weave in all of your ends, and that is your completed blanket. So thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you found this video helpful. If you'd like to see instructions for the other colorways that I've got, so this one is Calm the Shenanigans. Shenanigans just came from, it's one of my children's favourite words at the moment, and yeah, we sort of came up with a play on an Afghan Shenani-ghan thing. So this is Calm the Shenanigans. I've also got colorways for Festive Shenanigans for a Christmas version, Proud Shenanigans for the rainbow version, and I've also done Scrappy Shenanigans as well, using up some of my many partial skeins in my my stash. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me as always, and I will see you again soon for something new. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye bye.